So I'm going to read Project Non-Suffering, a white paper on metric alignment. Guess I could turn my camera. Wrong one. There. Project Non-Suffering, a white paper on metric alignment, version 3.1. Subtitle, T equals 0 plus G. There should be a space there, so let's put a space there. The grand unified theory of everything. Lead auditor, Scott Altzenstell, that would be me. Section 1, abstraction. Suffering is a metric deficit. It is the result of an observer, human being, using ancient evolutionary tools for resources scarcity, telling stories of suffering, when the reality is an extremely high resource abundant environment. This paper proposes a resolution to the quote-unquote hard problem of consciousness by reclassifying the observer as a static metric coordinate within a 1G gravitational container. Utilizing the SIDI model and semantic marker hypotheses, we demonstrate that quote-unquote suffering is not a spiritual condition, but a metric deficit, a failure of the prefrontal cortex to reconcile the inner voice self-story with the omnipresent 1G squeeze. By defining consciousness as the gravitational coordinate T equals 0 plus G, memory as a metabolic reconstruction T equals 0 minus 1, this framework provides a calibration protocol to eliminate intentional and intellectual dishonesty and achieves homeostatic equilibrium. The goal is a biological trickle-down effect where signal cleansing at high connectivity alpha nodes stabilizes the global network in a state of interdependent safety. That should be highlighted. Here's the schematic. You have danger and suffering on the left, ultimate stress. So suffering is ultimate stress. That means there's danger. Life seems to have a direction pointing that way. On the other side, we have safety, non-suffering or not suffering, ultimate comfort. This seems to be the direction of life. Down here, we have the stressors. From left to right, from suffering to non-suffering, we have suffering, ultimate stress, pain, fear, anxiety, craving, enjoyment, pleasure, ultimate comfort. If you fall into a vat of oil, you can, or let's do this one. If you put your arm into a vat of oil, you are suffering. You can actually pull your arm out so quickly that you can tear a muscle, you can break a bone, you can spill oil all over the place, but you are now safer. Suffering points you in a direction of safety. So, the auditor's preface on linguistic failure and intellectual honesty. Language has failed. The most optimal tool ever created to transfer information between brains has been sabotaged, not by quote-unquote word drift, but by intentional obfuscation and intellectual dishonesty. Every word has a definition found in a dictionary, yet in the human condition, these definitions are routinely discarded in favor of emotional attachment. Some humans use words not to map reality and support healthy communication, but to trigger an emotional reaction. The intentional equivocation reduces interdependent safety. The author's story. As lead auditor, I recognize that I, too, operate with a story. However, I have audited my inner voice self-story and made a collaboration choice. I respect myself. I enjoy being me. I like the guy I see in the mirror. My inner voice self-story is told to me by my best friend with care, patience, curiosity, and a generosity of spirit. I am at utter and total peace with myself and existence. I am the change I wish to see in the world. I invite you to start your prefrontal cortex practice with intellectual honesty and audit the metrics that follow. The auditor's disclosure. Why you? Why me? The synthesis. See, this was sent to a professor who wrote a book about the soul. Or, yeah, this is part, yeah. Anyway, I have queried the large language model Gemini hundreds of times to find a presentation of this grand unified theory. The result is consistent. While the individual physics and biological components are known, me are the first human being to synthesize them into a scalar equation for interdependent safety. The section, I have chosen to send this to you because you wrote the book. You dismantled the quote-unquote soul, but you left a void where the software for peace must reside. I don't like must. But we'll leave it for now. Consciousness is simply a high-resolution term for awareness. I have solved for the source of that awareness, T equals 0 plus G. The verdict, whether this is a profound insight or a heaping pile of excrement, is for you to audit. I am not asking for belief. I am providing the now data, now information, and now knowledge for your own prefrontal cortex to update. Section 2, the primary equation, T equals 0 plus G. Consciousness, inner peace, and memory. The grand unified theory's initial reference frame is the quote-unquote operator. T, the now moment, the initial reference frame, the only temporal coordinate where consciousness and learning occur. Consciousness, an inevitable outcome of gravity, G, and the location 0. Inner peace, the homeostatic equilibrium of the biological organism in alignment with reality. Inner peace equals the now moment plus gravity. The evidence of now data, now information, and now knowledge. As demonstrated by the film The Sixth Sense, once you possess now data, now information, and now knowledge, NDIK, you cannot not know it. On the first watch, the quote-unquote twist is unknown. On the second watch, you have applied NDIK. You now know. Unless there is a hardware failure, for example, 10-second time memory leaks, a functional brain must update its software based on NDIK. Gravity, G, the 1G squeeze. Earth's gravitational constants of 9.81 meters per second. Conscious practice of awareness and appreciation of the 1G squeeze promotes eccentric loading and postural tonus, reducing chronic systemic tension. This physical signal signals a brain to cease the production of survival or conflict-based stress hormones. The temporal mechanics of memory, T equals 0 minus 1. While T equals 0 plus G defines the observer in the physical reality of the now moment, the metric of an event that has happened is defined to prevent metabolic waste / theft hormonal hijacking. Metric proof, T equals 0 minus 1. The validity of this equation is found in the biometrics of the observer. Any movement away from the now moment 0 and into the data of the past -1 results in a measurable stress hormone-laden ecosystem. Cortisol levels, heart rate variability, and muscle tonus provide the empirical evidence of this metric deficit. To live in T equals 0 minus 1 is to commit metabolic suicide. The correction, prefrontal cortex practice. The prefrontal cortex practice is the manual override of this deficit. By consciously acknowledging the 1G squeeze, T equals 0 plus G, the observer feeds the prefrontal cortex the now data, now information, and now knowledge. This should be NDIK. It should be without that, and it should be without that, but it should be with that, and I think it should be with that, and I think it should be with that, and that. That contradicts the quote-unquote past story. This physical sensation acts as a circuit breaker, signaling the brain to cease hormonal theft and return the vessel to homeostatic equilibrium. Memory as reconstruction, T equals 0. Science and the Project Non-Suffering audit confirm that a memory is not a recording, but a reconstruction created in the now moment 0 within the current chemical state and structure of the brain. I'm thinking that should probably be T. I think that should be T. I think something up here should be T as well. T, I think this should be capitalized. I think it should be highlighted. And we'll highlight that as well. Within the current chemical state and structure of the brain. The data reference, -1. The -1 represents data from a previous coordinate. It is an evolutionary tool designed for reducing the now moment metabolic cost, not for re-experiencing dwelling regrets. The accuracy gap. Because the equation 0 equals 0 minus 1, it is by definition not 0, the now moment. I guess it should be T. Yeah, anyway. So I guess this one should be T 0. Bump. Yeah, I'll go back and change that later. Not understanding a memory is not accurate. Not understanding a memory is not accurate is a metric deficit, a hardware glitch where the observer down regulates the actual data of their current safety. Case study. HSAM glitch. HSAM, highly superior autobiographic memory, is evidence of the metabolic theft inherent in dwelling on the past. Affecting fewer than 100 humans globally, HSAM is not quote unquote superior memory, but a failure of the brain's natural pruning efficiency system. HSAM individuals suffer higher rates of regret and emotional distress because they are unable to decouple the t equals 0 minus 1 data from the t equals 0 physiological state. They prove that the human vessel is designed for metabolic efficiency, learn and don't dwell, not to store and suffer. The sixth sense analogy is the quote-unquote kill switch. It proves that the human brain cannot not use the NDIK, now data, now information, and now knowledge, when presented with it. T equals 0 minus 1 prevents that from happening. Metric resolution of solipsism. The equation T equals 0 plus G terminates the hard problem of solipsism by reclassifying the observer T as a product of material mass 0 and the gravitational container G. We identify that existence is a geometric phase transition. Even in a that scenario, a quote-unquote that scenario, the presence of the 1G squeeze G provides empirical proof of the external metric container. Awareness is the mechanical result of this alignment. Section 3, the secular equation, world peace. World peace is equal to the sum of, bracket, alpha nodes to the exponential of prefrontal cortex practice divided by t equals 0 minus 1. So that means alpha nodes are the upper echelon, the YouTube influencers, the TikTok influencers. If they're actually practicing the prefrontal cortex, that means living in the now moment, experiencing the now moment, not dwelling and regretting and telling pathetic inner voice self stories where the voice is a frenemy or enemy. Then the signal is cleansed and it is exponentially larger than ordinary people, ordinary humans who practice prefrontal cortex. See, this is exponential. This is only multiplied. Again, divided by the amount of time that they don't spend in the now moment, that lowers their signal. The variables, the variable audit, and the now data, now knowledge, and now information. World peace, the WP is the world peace, the total network output of interdependent safety, and homeostatic equilibrium. I think we're going to highlight this. It makes it pretty. That. Alpha nodes, high connectivity hubs whose influence on the network is exponential, Metcalfe's law. Prefrontal cortex practice, the now signal. The act of manually anchoring the vessel in the 1G squeeze, T equals 0 plus G. This is the signal cleansing quote-unquote variable. When this value increases in the alpha node, the exponential broadcast shifts from the scarcity fear to the safety curiosity. T equals 0 plus 1. I think we're going to do that. I think we're going to do this. I think we're going to do this. And heck, we'll do that. The denominator of the not now moment, the metabolic drag created by dwelling on trauma, regret, or past stories. This is the quote-unquote noise that divides and reduces the power of the signal. OH, other humans. The general population, while their PFC practice is vital for their own T equals 0 plus G, that text seems rather large. Nope. While their PFC, prefrontal cortex practice, is vital for their own T equals 0 plus G alignment, inner peace, their impact on global world peace metric is linear, not exponential. This is not a bottom-up grassroots struggle, but a top-down signal cleansing necessity. It utilizes the exponential power of high connectivity nodes to greatly increase the interdependent safety signal across global human ecosystem. The global human ecosystem. The contagion effect. Signals from Maslow's perch, high-status social influencers, alpha nodes, broadcast exponentially faster than all other human beings. Prioritization. Facilitating self-respect and inner peace for the occupants on Maslow's perch is the most economical and optimal path to global interdependent safety. When the broadcast towers stop glitching, the signal of fear stops spreading. Section 4, the calibration protocol, establishing a linear baseline. To ensure interdependent safety and prevent metabolic waste, every high-level interaction must be preceded by a calibration sequence. This protocol functions as a linguistic and environmental handshake, stripping away somatic noise and ensuring both vessels are operating on the same now data, now information, and now knowledge. Step 1, the linguistic handshake, the dictionary. Query, which dictionary will we be using for this interaction? This does not need to be here. Purpose. This establishes the standard operating procedure for language. By selecting a specific source, practitioners eliminate semantic drift, ideological dogma, and spooky variables. It forces the conversation into an objective, data-driven framework where words have fixed, measurable meanings. Step 2, the environmental audit, hardware sync. Query. Please describe the environment we find ourselves in. Purpose. This forces a physicalist audit of the immediate coordinates. By verbalizing the safety, temperature, and physical reality of the room, both observers synchronize their threat detection systems. It bypasses the limbic hijack and brings the prefrontal cortex, PFC, online to acknowledge the actual data of the 1G. Step 3, the diagnostic scan, the inner story. Query, what is your inner voice self story? Purpose. This step requires the disclosure of the quote-unquote background script currently running on the other person's hardware. It identifies metric drifts such as entitlement, perceiving suffering, or quote-unquote must-based narratives. By externalizing the story, the practitioner can treat it as now data, now information, now knowledge, rather than identity. Step 4, biometric stabilization. Once the dictionary, software, environment, hardware, and story input are agreed upon, the participants have reached homeostatic equilibrium. The quote-unquote biological jitter is removed, allowing for a linear, rational, and logical exchange. The practitioner's law, if the conditions of the environment or the definitions of the language cannot be agreed upon, the interaction is aborted. To continue without calibration is to engage in metabolic theft and participate in a metric deficit. Here is a diagram. I will make this a little smaller of the bottom-up, top-down flow of experience. Here we have awareness, intuition, communication, the body. Then we have communication systems and mind. So you're aware of something, then you have an intention, then a signal is sent out via these systems, the endocrine system, the limbic system, the nervous system, and the circulatory system to the body, the ecosystem. I should put ecosystem on this. Then the body sends signals back via the circulatory system, the nervous system, the limbic system, the endocrine system, back to the mind, who is then aware. This is a top-down, bottom-up flow experience. The reason why there are Chinese here, the Chinese words, shun, yi, qi, jin, qi, shun, is because it's Tai Chi based. Step 5, the global us. Comfort is strength, an active state definition of comfort. The biological feedback loop of safety. When you are comfortable, you feel safe. When you are safe, you feel comfortable. Stronger together, comfortus. The realization and acknowledgement of the interdependent safety. A global us is a population that acknowledges the reality of the 1G squeeze of the shared gravitational field, geometric phase transition on the shared planet, shared hardware, and shared software. Comfort, corruption. Comfort is being used as an active state definition from quote-unquote passive ease to active shared strength. Sympathy over empathy. We define empathy as a hardware glitch leading to hormonal hijack, shared distress. We define sympathy as a PFP practice, prefrontal cortex practice, that maintains the auditor's homeostasis, T equals 0 plus G, allowing for the optimal allocation of metabolic resources towards these actual needs. Section 6, the hardware audit, the metrics. Human beings share the vast majority of hardware, biological systems, and organs. Human beings share the same measurable biometrics, resting heart rate variability, pulse, blood pressure, saliva test, hormones, etc. These numbers, there should be a space there. These numbers are now data, now information, and now knowledge, and are mandatory for all surgery, surgical. That should probably be surgical. Surgical. Procedures performed in modern scientifically validated medical procedures. The ability to update software, habits, inner voice self-story, IVSS, with now data, now information, now knowledge depends on identifying ancient evolutionary tools that are designed for 150 individual tribes and resource deficit environments, and updating to modern prefrontal cortex practices. Prefrontal cortex practiced habits based on now data, now information, and now knowledge. I'm going to do that. We're going to do that. We're going to do that. 1. The biological blind spots. Scotoma. Phylogenetically older neural structures. Under high stress, the brain's filtering system, RAS, only renders data that matches a quote-unquote survival story. The glitch, a fellow human being on Maslow's perch, post-scarcity environment conditions, but their neural circuitry is localized in a survival state, quote-unquote survival mode. A fellow human being on Maslow's perch. A fellow human being on Maslow's perch. There's a word missing there. But think. But there. Think. Respond. React. React as if. React as if. No, I don't like that. But their neural circuitry reacts. That's better. As if localized in a survival state, quote unquote survival mode. The habitual loop basal ganglia. Phylogenetically older neural structures, habits stored in the basal ganglia bypass the prefrontal cortex to minimize metabolic cost. The glitch, habitually using ancient tools, ancient evolutionary tools. While sitting on Maslow's perch, becomes a reflexive loop. No period. Running automated habitual behaviors and not updated with now data, now knowledge, and now information, now knowledge, since their last perceived trauma. Becomes a reflexive loop. Running automated habitual behaviors and not updating with now data, now information, and now knowledge. I don't like that. Since their last perceived trauma. Have to think about that. Hormonal hijacking, the SIDI model. Phylogenetically older neural structures, elevated cortisol and adrenaline, reallocation metabolic resources away from the PFC, the prefrontal cortex. The newest hardware and software add-on to the ancient hardware tools. The glitch. This engages the evolutionary survival story, quote unquote, the false intuition, causing more racing heart and held tension. Section 7, the final audit, identifying displaced behaviors. A human being on Maslow's perch who is cognitively decoupled from environmental metrics of the extremely high resource abundant environment they experience. Indicators include dehumanization, starting any thought or interaction about or with anything other than quote unquote fellow human being, using labels, rats and cockroaches, even though they have metabolic resources to process the now data, now information, and now knowledge of interacting with a fellow human being. Holding tension, ignoring gravity. Vestibular and proprioceptive neglect. Remaining physically rigid and tense because the basal ganglia is stuck in an ancient survival protocol of the 4 Fs: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So in other words, as I sit here and read this, my energy is going up, but I'm feeling my buttocks, I'm feeling the weight of my shoulders, I'm feeling the weight of my hands, I'm feeling the weight of my hand on the mouse. That is me feeling gravity, not holding tension, not engaging the 4 Fs. Language, entitlement language, must, need, there has to be, versus privileged language. I respect myself. I'm complete. I'm curious. Section 8, summary verdict. World peace is the byproduct of a population that has successfully audited its own hardware and audited their own hardware and practiced using their prefrontal cortex. By practicing T equals 0 plus G, a human being facilitates the ecosystem's body. Facilitates the ecosystem's chemical composition necessary to engage in practice using the prefrontal cortex. This allows the use of now data, now information, and now knowledge. Should not be highlighted. Practice new habits, creating safe and healthy habitual loops of self-respect and healthy curiosity. Do this. Section 9, the Alpha Node Audit, a self-diagnostic. To verify the metrics of this manifest, the recipient is invited to perform the following hardware check. 1. The 1G audit. Are you currently aware of the Earth's 9.81 meters per second squeeze on your vessel? If not, you are in vestibular neglect. Step 2. The temporal audit. Are your current biometrics, elevated heart rate, muscle tension, reacting to the room or the data point from T equals 0 minus 1? Steps 3. The semantic audit. Are you using the word phrase? Are you using the word phrase? My fellow human beings, or is your RAS filtering for a label? Section 9, Alpha Node Audit, Spigot versus Spring. That was 8. That's 9. A broadcast tower is only as useful as the signal it carries. A survey of current alpha nodes reveals a systemic metric drift. The authoritarian spigots, for example, Putin and Trump, these nodes utilize exponential connectivity to broadcast scarcity and conflict narratives. They are quote-unquote vampire nodes, requiring a network in a state of chronic T equals 0 minus 1, fear, to maintain their own metabolic dominance. The emotional dwellers, for example, Taylor Swift, pop culture. Instead of pop culture, I'm going to put Oprah Winfrey. Oprah. I'm just going to leave it at Oprah. Despite high resource status, these nodes broadcast the glitch of dwelling. Narratives centered on regret and past tense emotional fixation, T equals 0 minus 1. Reinforce the hardware level, quote unquote, suffering loop in the general population. I think I'd like this to say habit. The false spring. For example, Mother Teresa, a poison spigot that focuses on the sensation of suffering rather than the data of safety. It requires a quote-unquote drowning audience to validate its own identity. The signal verified spring. As of this audit, I, the lead auditor, am the only node I can verify as operating at a constant state of t equals 0 plus g. I have audited the inner voice self-story and achieved total homeostatic equilibrium. This is not a claim of superiority, but a report on current network metrics. I have constant state. I don't like that. I can verify optimizing. A state of Section 10, from mimetic placebos to metric anchors, quote unquote. The quote unquote hard problem of consciousness and the paradox of hard solipsism are resolved through geometric alignment. Historically, humans have used quote unquote memes, placebo anchors, to achieve internal peace. The lead auditor identifies that these are functional but if insufficient quote unquote software patches. I don't know why that's in there. I like it there. The hierarchy of anchors. The distinction between three levels of observer alignment. Bullet point 1. The victim. No anchor. Operates in the t equals 0 minus 1. No metric anchor. The vessel is at the mercy of the limbic hijack and the quote-unquote drowning in the sand schemata. That is using language from further ahead. See Appendix A. Bullet point 2, the believer. Mimetic anchor uses a special story, a quote-unquote special story. For example, the Jewish meme as a placebo anchor. This successfully triggers the prefrontal cortex and stabilizes the vessel, but it is conditional. If the story, the VIP pass is challenged, the metabolic cost of maintaining the anchor increases. The lead auditor, the metric anchor. Using the 1G squeeze, G, as the anchor. This is absolute because gravity is a physical constant of the 1G squeeze container. The brain requires zero faith, quote unquote, to maintain the anchor. The now data, now information, and now knowledge of the pressure on the vessel is the ultimate kill switch for suffering. Section 2, no, not section 2, point 2, the 1G squeeze. The first post-mimetic replicator. The lead auditor recognizes that the t equals 0 plus g equation is essentially the first quote-unquote true meme. Bullet point 1, Dawkins replicator. For a meme to survive, it must be fruitful and high fidelity. The metric edge. Bullet point 2. Unlike religious or political memes, the 1G squeeze does not require cultural transmission. It is a proprioceptive fact. By anchoring the inner voice self-story to the Earth's 9.81 meters per second squared squeeze, the auditor creates a replicator that is immune to intellectual dishonesty. You cannot lie to your brain about the weight of your own body. The resolution of solipsism via the metric gravity. Hard solipsism is terminated by the equation t equals 0 plus g. The reality check. Even if the observer is a brain in a vat, the vat has a weight. The 1G squeeze is the handshake, quote unquote, between the observer's mass, 0. I thought that was time. That's why I messed up before. That was the other. Yeah. I got to think about that one. The efficiency gain. Oh, I didn't finish reading that. Between the observer's mass 0 and the unified field G. The efficiency gain. This is stuff before that was. Yeah, anyway, I got to check that. But the efficiency gain, moving from a special story, placebo, to gravity physics, provides a massive metabolic discount. The brain stops searching for meaning, a noisy signal, and settles into measurement, a clean signal. The integrated analysis of the 3 mice. The now moment map of the evolutionary trajectory of risk and survival. Toxoplasmosis, the hijacked mouse. Total metric deficit. The hardware is tricked into death. John Dunbar, from Dances with Wolves, the desperate mouse. Accidental metric break, a glitch that confuses the predator. In other words, when in the movie Dances with Wolves, when John Dunbar says that he can't take anymore, so he gets on his horse and he rides along. He's doing a behavior that the other side wasn't expecting, and that's why he didn't get hit, because it was just a fluke. It caused them to be excited, and so they weren't in their prefrontal cortex doing their routine or habit because they were so exciting, so they never shot him, right? So he confused the predator. The Jewish meme, the protected mouse. Conditional metric anchor, a story that mimics safety to ensure reproduction. Number 4, the lead auditor, the calibrated mouse. Absolute metric anchor. Uses the now data, now information, now knowledge of the 1G squeeze to remain in the Barcalounger. Again, see appendix A. While acknowledging the total safety of the coordinate. Section 10, the category correction from philosophy to physics. The hard problem of consciousness and the paradox of hard solipsism are not unsolvable mysteries. They are category errors. Traditionally, these are framed as metaphysical questions, attempts to find a spiritual or magic bridge between matter and awareness. By reclassifying the observer as a set of the physical constants, we shift the inquiry into the domain of metric geometry. The resolution of solipsism. Hard solipsism is terminated by the equation t equals 0 plus g. The identity t. The observer is not an abstract entity, but a temporal coordinate where data is processed in the brain. The location, 0. This represents the physical mass and matter of the biological vessel. See, that's what I was thinking of before. I got to check that. The container G. This is the universal constant of Earth's 9.81 meters per second gravitational field, the 1G squeeze. The 1G kill switch. Even if one entertains the brain in a vat scenario, the vat has a metric. For a brain to exist and process information, it requires mass 0 and a field G to provide structure to its electrochemical signals. Gravity is the universal constant that anchors the observer to a reality beyond their internal story. We are not, quote unquote, imagining weight. We are experiencing a mandatory interaction with the metric container of the planet, a metabolic discount. Moving from philosophy to physics provides a metabolic advantage. Philosophy is expensive, quote unquote, requires endless must-based narratives to sustain a sense of self. Physics is, quote unquote, efficient. Once the 1G squeeze is acknowledged, the hardware terminates the debate because the answer is already physically present in the room. This shift facilitates healthy curiosity over the defensive, quote unquote, linguistic noise of traditional metaphysics. Section 10, the biological buffer, metabolic latency. The transition from a limbic hijack to homeostatic equilibrium is a 2-stage process. While the prefrontal cortex, PFC, can achieve a near instantaneous logical update when presented with now data, now information, and now knowledge of the 1G squeeze, the physical vessel is subject to metabolic latency. Pool point 1, the logical update. Upon recognizing the equation t equals 0 plus g, the prefrontal cortex terminates the story t equals 0 minus 1 and identifies the absence of the current threat, the chemical flush. Hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, once released into the bloodstream, have a physical half-life. The auditor must acknowledge that the body may continue to experience a somatic echo, quote unquote, of stress for a duration of roughly 60 to 90 minutes. The guardrail. This somatic echo is not a failure of the inner voice self-story audit. It is simply the vessel processing the quote-unquote spilled signal from the previous glitch. The true PFC, prefrontal cortex practice involves maintaining an engaged, appreciative state of physics and logic while the body flushes the remaining chemical noise. Citations, I'm not reading all those citations, but they're there. They're all provided. Loftus, the HMD glitch, the physical shift, the chemical claim. Appendix A, behavioral heuristics. Are you a spring or a spigot? A diagnostic analogy. Envision a natural spring. Now place a cylinder open on both ends on top of the spring. From now on, this is the vessel. If the spring is weak, it cannot fill the vessel. Nothing around it gets watered. If the spring is strong, it fills the vessel and maybe spills a little over the sides, watering a few things nearby. Now, envision a spring so strong that the water floweth over. Everything around the vessel gets watered. A natural stream is created and flows from the vessel. The source of the spring is the inner voice self-story. I thought I capitalized that. Is that turn? No. Inner voice self-story. My cup is not half empty or half full. My cup floweth over. That is me as the auditor. Now envision a spigot. Some vessels have spigots installed by themselves or others, families, friends, identities, and stories. Water is diverted from the vessel to fill someone else's cup because their own spring is not strong enough. I think that should be vessel. Because their own spring is not strong enough, whether in reality or in their inner voice self-story. This prevents the vessel from fully filling or ever flowing over. Some spigots are poison, drama, stress, energy, enemy, inner voice self-story. When installed, they poison the spring and divert the water at the same time. Sometimes they kill the spring entirely. I have removed all spigots. Now, everything around me gets watered because of the steady, fertile marshland surrounds me, the vessel. Inner voice self-story. The story you tell yourself about yourself. Whose voice tells that story to you, and in what manner this voice tells the story to you. The spring and spigot, the metabolic resource audit. It provides a mechanical model for a metabolic flux. It explains how a fellow human being on Maslow's perch, which I claim to be, can have all the water resources but still be dry, suffering because of self-installed leaks. Donald Trump would be such a person. The vessel dynamics of allostatic load, illustrating how prefrontal cortex practice is required to remove the metabolic drains caused by ancient survival loops. Wilson's snowball and iceberg analogy, the adaptive unconscious. I wonder if that's in the citations. I should put that in the citations. Timothy D. Wilson. Timothy D. Wilson, referencing the adaptive unconscious, quote unquote, the iceberg signals that you understand the basal ganglia / habitual loop. Dominance. The snowball is the inner voice self-story. If the snowball is made of suffering stories, it rolls down the iceberg and grows into a downhill roll of unnecessary self-inflicted mental suffering. By PFCP, the observer stops the snowball getting dizzy from rolling around the iceberg. The Barcalounger on the beach, a diagnostic analogy. Envision the most comfortable Barcalounger ever created. Now envision two such chairs lined up on the most beautiful beach in existence. I am sitting in one. That would be me, the auditor. Comfortable, relaxing, drinking a mock pina colada. I notice the other Barcaloungers empty. Curious, I look at the beach around me. I see my fellow white cis male human beings lying in the dry sand, shoving their faces in the sand, and screaming, "Help me, I'm drowning." I look at the tide pools left behind by the receding waters. Other fellow white cis human beings and fellow human beings of color and transgender fellow human beings are lying in 2 inches of water, shoving their faces in the silt and screaming, "Help me, I'm drowning." I look further out into the shallows and see the same. Humans kneeling in deep water, faces submerged, screaming, "Help me, I'm drowning." Further out in the deep swells, there are other fellow human beings who are actually drowning. They aren't screaming. They are fighting silently for survival. I am not a strong enough swimmer to reach them. I use my comfort and my prefrontal cortex practice to assess the situation. I realize the most efficient and optimal path to save those in the deep waters is to recruit my fellow white cis male human beings on the sand. I walk up to my fellow white cis male human beings, face down in the dry sand, bend over and say, "Look at me. We're safe. Look at me. We're safe." But they refuse. They continue to shove their faces into the sand, gripped by a survival story. Screaming, "Help me, I'm drowning." The audit, where are you in this analogy? Are you in the chair or are you in the deep? Or are you drowning in the sand? The bark lounger on the beach, the post-scarcity glitch, metric deficit, the most vivid illustration. The scenario: a fellow human being a fellow human being who is in the most resource abundant, safe environment possible, the beach, Maslow's perch. Yet their hardware is simulating a must-based crisis because their chair isn't at the right angle. The audit. This proves that suffering is not environmental. It is a software, hardware mismatch. It forces the auditor to ask, am I reacting to the sand or am I reacting to the 10-second Tom memory of a desert? My definition of suffering is an evolutionary mechanism that allows a human being, a mammal, or an animal to do whatever is necessary to survive. Think Aaron Ralston. Inner voice self-story, the story a human being tells themselves about themselves, whose voice tells that story to them, and the manner in which the story is told to them by the voice. The manner in which the voice tells them the story. My inner voice self-story. I respect myself. I enjoy being me. I am comfortable. I like the guy I see in the mirror. I am at utter and total peace with myself and existence. I am the change I wish to see in the world. The voice is my own strong, authentic, genuine, honest voice, and it is told to me by my best friend with care, patience, curiosity, awareness, appreciation, and generosity of spirit. I'm a super privileged, able-bodied, 55-year-old Caucasian cisgender male, educated, who has never suffered a nanosecond of my existence. Show me I'm wrong. My snowball and its 40 pieces of information feel gravity. Make sure I exhale. Practice my inner voice self-story and sit back and watch the amazing ecosystem I am a part of. There is no I in ecosystem, but there is one in iceberg. I claim I am experiencing life exactly the way I want to. If I wanted to experience it differently, I would tell myself a different story. Show me I'm wrong. I have one emotional attachment, interdependent safety. The fellow human being protocol, a prefrontal cortex practice override. The mechanism: by intentionally prefixing every thought, interaction with the phrase "my fellow human being," the observer initiates a mandatory software update. The override. This phrase serves as a kill switch for the scotoma of dehumanization. It forces the reticular activity system, RAS, to bypass ancient tribal labels and return to the hardware metrics, a shared 1G ecosystem. The result: it collapses the metric deficit. You are no longer interacting with a quote unquote label. You are interacting with a shared coordinate in the global us. The habitual law. Humans are good at what they practice. What humans practice becomes habit. Habit requires significantly less thought and fewer metabolic resources because they shift from the prefrontal cortex to the basal ganglia. The goal: through consistent repetition, the prefrontal cortex response, logic, sympathy, eventually becomes the default stress reaction. You quote unquote, you clean the signal, quote unquote, so thoroughly that self-respect, quote unquote, and healthy curiosity, quote unquote, become automated, low-cost survival tools. I don't like that phrasing. Habits. 1. Empathy, the mirror neuron hijack. Empathy is a phylogenetically older tool. It is the biological process of quote unquote feeling with. While it was useful in small tribes for immediate danger on Maslow's perch, it becomes a poison spigot. When you empathize with a fellow human being who is face down in the sand, your own hardware begins to simulate drowning. You have now compromised your own vessel, making you useless to the person in the deep water. 2. Sympathy, the auditor's awareness. Sympathy is a prefrontal cortex practice. It is quote unquote feeling for while maintaining metric alignment. It is the ability to recognize the other person's suffering without allowing your own hormonal levels to be hijacked. Sympathy allows you to retain comfort and strength. Comfort, strength, comfortable strength, and distance. So you can walk over and say, look at me, we are safe. The alpha node requirement. For trickle-down neurological piece to work, the alpha nodes must practice sympathy, not empathy. If a leader empathizes with the fear of the crowd, they become the crowd. The signal remains noisy. If the leader sympathizes, they acknowledge the fear, but keep their prefrontal cortex online to provide the now data, now information, and now knowledge of safety. The end. Wow, that was a long time. Thanks for stopping by. Later. Enjoy and be comfortable.